Welcome back. It's June 2nd. This is segment 3 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Calvin Cook, and we're going to be talking about what's happening at Shawnigan Lake. Calvin is part of the Shawnigan Residents Association, and maybe you can just briefly tell us what's going on there.
Well, thanks again for having us on, Jack. This is with regards to the permit to put contaminated dump site at the headwaters of Shawnigan Lake. It's a 50-year project, and the proposal is, the permit has been granted, and they're now authorized to dump up to 100,000 tons a year for 50 years or 5 million tons of contaminated soil at the headwaters of Shawnigan Lake.
And when you say contaminated, it can be very badly contaminated.
Yeah, I mean, that's the... most people are familiar with Julia Roberts and the movie that she did several years ago. In Hinckley, California, there was contaminated soil by Pacific Gas and Energy, multi-million-dollar lawsuit won by the character that Julia played. The residents, of course, the money that they won was never sufficient to compensate them for the damage that they suffered. But the good news for those residents is that cleanup's still going on. But we can take all that contaminated soil up in Shawnigan Lake and put it above our lake. There's no restrictions on where this material can come from, and very few restrictions on what type of material can be dumped there.
Yeah, so Shawnigan Lake is in very serious danger, and thousands of people draw their drinking water from it.
Correct.
Now, CFAX Radio was reporting last week, the owner of the site, saying the science is clear, suggesting that there was no problem. What is the science?
Well, unfortunately, Jack, this boils right back down to what we have as the professional reliance model that the BC government has been using for the last several years. And this is the professional reliance model that was just under severe criticism by our BC Ombudsperson. She made 25 recommendations, of which 24 have been promised to be followed up on. But really what that means is that rather than having our own scientists do a peer review, we just accept the proponent's science. And in this case, the Active Earth, the engineering firm that came up with this proposal, has never done this type of proposal before. Their original claim that this site was on 75 meters of impervious rock, which would protect the citizens of Shawnigan. Certainly that has been under a great deal of criticism. That criticism comes from not only the 9 experts that we hired to testify at the Environmental Appeal Board hearings, but also at 2 individual scientists within the actual Ministry of Environment themselves questioned that science. 3 days before the Environmental Appeal Board hearings started, the proponent introduced another scientific report saying that yes, the rock was severely fractured and that it wasn't an impervious rock layer. Active Earth also failed to do the most basic engineering site analysis, which was to check on the wells that were in the area. Active Earth, the engineering firm that drew up this system, failed to identify the type of material that they'd use, the liner system. They said that it would be adequate to provide protection for the citizens of Shawnigan Lake into perpetuity. We brought in a scientist that disputed that.
How thick is this liner?
If you were to take 2 tunis and stack them, it's slightly less than that.
So 5 million tons of toxic material mixed in with soil, and this is the liner that's going to protect.
A couple of things have happened that have never happened in any other site, Jack. Is typically a contaminated site is perhaps an area that needs remediation, so the site is remediated and then they turn it into a contaminated site. In this case, for the first time in North America, we have a pristine site that's being turned into a contaminated site.
So why does Christy Clark and her government want to take the risk? And it's not even a risk because it's 100% certainty that the material, the 5 million tons, is up here and Shawnigan Lake is down here. I mean, there's only one place where it's going to go.
Jack, the science is proven that the contaminants will outlast the engineered solution. And what the citizens of Victoria fail to understand is that it's actually closer to Victoria's water supply than it is to Shawnigan's water supply. CRD has just recently taken up on this, wants to do further studies. All along, the suggestion has been, well, there's no proof of connectivity, and all we're saying is that there's no proof that they're not connected. And is it worth the risk? And you mentioned our government, and I think that any time we have a democratically elected government that's making decisions that negatively impact thousands of people for the benefit of very, very few, surely that's not good governance. And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for leadership, someone to step up and say, no, this is the wrong place for this. The science is clear. It does not meet site suitability. What the Environmental Appeal Board said, we understand the site isn't suitable, but based on probability, we will rely on an engineered solution. The Mount Polley disaster is a classic example of what happens when we rely on an engineered solution. We're not willing, the citizens of Shawnigan Lake are not willing to accept that risk. And I think it's really important that the citizens of Victoria understand that their water supply could also be at risk.
So how far is the site from Shawnigan Lake?
About 5 kilometers.
And how far is it from Souk Lake, which is where we draw our drinking water from?
About 4 kilometers. It's actually only 2.1 kilometers from Luba Lake, which feeds directly into Souk Lake. It is of concern. And again, when we ask ourselves, what are the risks? What are the benefits? Well, the risk is fresh, clean drinking water. Time and time again, our government says that they are there to protect us. Jack, I'm raising money. We're gone to the Supreme Court of BC now to challenge our Minister of Environment, the Ministry of Environment, the very people that we rely on to protect our clean water. Shouldn't there, if there's any question at all, shouldn't that be the one ministry that steps in and says, no, there's a risk to the citizens of BC, there's a risk to clean water? Shouldn't we be able to rely on that ministry?
Who is the Minister of the Environment?
It's Minister Pollock, and we took a delegation, we met with her, and frankly, to be very frank, I was extremely disappointed in her attitude. We went in with business leaders, we went in with the headmaster from Shawnigan Lake School, a world-class facility. Next year, they'll celebrate their 100th anniversary, one of the finest educational institutes in North America. And he said, in his own words, that this permit would be a death knell for that school. It's the largest employer in our area. A tremendous, tremendous history, a tremendous future being placed at risk. For what reasons? We don't know that, Jack. There is no benefit to the community. We don't get crosswalks, we don't get parks, we don't get revenue, we get nothing out of it. And yet, as a community, we're asked to assume 100% of the risk.
So once again, we have to ask the question, why is Christy Clark doing this? Not only to the people of Shawnigan Lake, but to the people of Victoria, because this dump is 4 kilometers from Souk Lake, where this city gets its drinking water from. What has been the reaction? I mean, there's been nothing in the media about this. What is the reaction of our water department and the CRD towards this toxic
What they're going
site?
to do is they're going to do further studies into it to try to determine, and the difficulty is, of course, we're talking about an underground aquifer, and nobody knows how that
But if nobody knows, then that's exactly the problem. Nobody knows.
And that becomes the issue, is why take that risk? This Cowichan Valley Regional District, when they heard about this original application, offered $100,000 to do a study to find a more suitable site. Now, we understand nobody wants these in their own backyard, but certainly at the headwaters of a designated community drinking watershed is the last possible place it should be located. And what we want the people of BC, the citizens of Victoria, to understand is that if it can be put there, it can be put anywhere. Anywhere where you have a gravel pit is now a candidate for one of these sites. And we're saying that we can't, that professional reliance model is broken. What we have to do, if we want these sites to go in, we have to design them from the ground up. The engineering firm, their water treatment facility that they proposed for the site, the very first shipments they brought in contained salt, sodium. Their system wasn't designed to handle it. They would have discharged sodium or salt into Shawnigan Creek, wiping out that entire system. It was our scientists that we paid for, that we had testify at these hearings, the Environmental Appeal Board hearings, who testified that that system wouldn't work. So they said, well, we'll change the design. And the Environmental Appeal Board says, because it's a new engineering firm, there's bound to be growing pains and growing problems. Can we afford the risk? Can the people of BC afford to have this type of engineering, this type of science, placing our fresh water at risk?
So what's happening right now? Is waste material being placed at the site now?
Currently it is. It's on a management pad. Well, it will be going into containment cells. The other crazy part about this is that the site is only 20% dug. They've got another further 80% of material to remove, so it will be active blasting in that site, which has never occurred next to these containment sites. There are a number of very interesting questions as to what's gone on here, and that's what we're digging for. Currently, the Shawnigan Residents Association has applied to put this for a judicial review to the BC Supreme Court, and that's what we're waiting for now, is a judge to be appointed to hear our appeal of that permit.
Will this be stopped, the dumping of toxic material at the site while the court process takes place?
It's unlikely that we'll be able to do that, but the Cowichan Valley Regional District has also applied to the Supreme Court based on rezoning, because the land isn't zoned for that, and they will try for an injunction to prohibit material from being brought onto that site. It's important that people understand during those Environmental Appeal Board hearings, that engineering firm never testified, they never stood to be qualified as experts, and they were never cross-examined on their evidence. Their evidence was merely taken, where the evidence that we presented was not given any weight, even though we had qualified experts and were subject to cross. It's precedent-setting within Canadian law if this decision stands. And quite frankly, Jack, the citizens of Shawnigan Lake and of our drainage, all those 12,000 people who depend on that in drinking water, will not allow that to happen. We will have this permit overturned.
The Environmental Appeal Board sounds kind of like a pathetic joke. Is it any better than that?
Well, Jack, we certainly feel there were shortcomings, and we're now waiting the opportunity to prove those in court.
So what's happening as we speak? What's the next step?
The next step will be a judge will be appointed, and we will review with him a judicial review with the proceedings from the Environmental Appeal Board.
How quickly?
We're hoping to have the judge appointed within 90 days, and then those actual hearings should take between a week to 10 days.
And while we're waiting, truck material is being trucked into the site.
Correct.
Okay. We're out of time. This is, I mean, what can you say? But this is completely insane. The people of Victoria are at risk. The people of Shawnigan Lake are certainly at risk. Calvin, thank you very much for coming on, and thanks to the people of Shawnigan Lake for fighting this so hard. And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens.